Welcome to American Democracy Forum, powered by the Fulcrum and Citizen Connect. I'm Hugo Barta, Director of Solutions Journalism and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Fulcrum. A daily, cross-partisan news publication, the Fulcrum engages citizens in evolving government to better meet the needs of all people. To that end, we strive to share many perspectives to widen our readers' viewpoints. For this episode, I'm joined by Audra Watson, Chief of Youth Civic Programs. She leads citizens and scholars' youth-facing initiatives seeking to activate young people so that they have the skills needed to discuss important topics that divide us and can constructively engage in problem-solving with their communities. Audra and I met at the National Conference on Citizenship hosted in Washington, D.C. earlier this month. I had the chance to meet some of the winners of the Youth Civic Solutions Competition who discussed innovative ideas for civic engagement from a youth perspective. Welcome to the program, Audra.
Thank you so much for having me, Hugo. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation together.
As am I. Let's begin by learning more about citizens and scholars and your work with youth-facing initiatives.
Sure. So at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, what we do, we have a 75-year history of providing fellowships to academics, scholars, key thinkers to solve pressing problems. And so we have done that work through the use of fellowships to get people into academia and higher education. In approximately 2020, we widened and broadened our mission to really focus more deeply on young people, particularly those between 14 and 24, so that they are able to really engage deeply in citizen action and to be able to engage in constructive dialogue with one another and to solve really important problems that we have now that are challenging us. So with that broadened mission, there are a number of programs that we have, and I am fortunate to be able to run the ones that are particularly youth-facing.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very important perspective to capture and to nurture because so often young people, especially the demographic that you mentioned, are spoken about but not spoken to, let alone heard from. So I think it's the work that you're doing and the mission of your organization is so very important. I was very impressed with the Youth Civic Solutions Competition winners introduced at the National Conference on Citizenship that I mentioned previously was hosted in Washington, D.C. Tell us about the national challenge designed to elevate the voices of young people, as you said, aged 14 to 24, with innovative ideas about strengthening civic knowledge, engagement, and trust across the United States.
Absolutely. And so, as you said, just like you were impressed with these young people, we were incredibly impressed by them. We launched this initiative in August, late August. We had a timeline that young people were able to submit to provide us with submissions between August, I believe, 30th and October 4th. And in that time, we got 164 or 146 submissions from young people. As you said, we asked them to talk to us about what they thought were their best ideas for getting young people more civically knowledgeable, getting them to be better engaged in their communities, and then also how could they increase trust. And so we were heartened by the number of submissions that we received. Young people were asked to provide either a 300-word written submission or under a minute in terms of video submission. I think it's really important to also note that um, we only were able to offer 10 winners, but there were so many more that had really compelling ideas about how to do this work.
And the important part is also to how do you get to
The
the ones
10.
that didn't make it, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
working collaborative to do that. I think one of the things, and I like I mentioned, I had a chance to speak to some of the winners. One of the things that we're going to look to do, and certainly with your help, is highlight some of those winners and give them an opportunity, as they did at the conference, to talk about their ideas, responses to a challenge of this particular community not being civically engaged. And I think that's really important. You know, we at the Fulcrum, very much like your organization, want to lend our platform to raise the visibility of all communities, but as we're talking about this particular community, and give them the platform to talk about from their perspective what they think are the solutions to those challenges. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with you and realizing that initiative as well. In the competition that you just mentioned, and the students receiving sending their essays, are there what were is there a common thread in regards to the hurdles that they were discussing were barriers for their community to engage civically?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the young people, what they were saying was that they just weren't being listened to, right? And that they didn't have the resources to do the things that they thought might be important to listen sorry, that they thought would be important to do. I wanted to share with you one thing that we wanted to do with this competition is we wanted to decrease the barriers to entry. So we made it a fairly simple application and asked very straightforward questions. One of our concerns was that we were going to get the usual suspects. And I think because of the low barrier to entry for this, we were able to get young people who oftentimes aren't asked about their ideas, or don't have ways to access opportunities like this. Now, having said that, what was also interesting to us that many of the young people said that the ways that they heard about this competition was that they heard about it from significant adults in their lives.
And that's great, because I think getting one of the things in order to create civic engagement is to create a culture of civic engagement. So to have a pipeline, whether it's a mentor to walk them through it, or even among themselves, and this particular project and your organization is so very important. I had a chance to speak to one of the winners. His name is David, I believe David Gruo from
Yes. Well,
Arizona.
he's
Is
from
it Arizona?
Arizona.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what I really loved about his idea is that he walked me through that he's an artist, right? And he was thinking about art as a teaching tool, but also as a way to engage, and then focus the the practice of creating art by providing students create art that speaks to what civic engagement means to you. So, what a wonderful, creative, innovative way to be expressive on the artistic side, but then to also, as he said, research the topic of the art that you're creating. So now you're um, learning and
Mhm.
you're nurturing yourself about whether it's government, civic engagement, democracy. So I thought that
Absolutely.
I would not have thought about that
Yeah.
if not having a space like the
Mhm.
one your organization created for young people to say, how about this, based on their lived experience. So I think that's one of the wonderful things about this project that I think resonates with me as someone who's consistently looking to learn and looking at solutions journalism for some of the challenges that we face, and then creating the right platforms for that type of those types of ideas to flourish.
Yes. And I think I love that you highlighted him because I think he's a perfect example of the fact that we need many different entry points to get young people to really think about, to get them knowledgeable, to get them engaged, and to get them committed to doing things within their community. There are so many. Often, what we're doing is we're giving young people sit and get opportunities, right? And we're doing things either through the written word or traditional oral forms, etc., to be able to get young people who have a passion for the arts, etc., to be thinking differently about the world is really an exciting an exciting opportunity that he's providing to his peers.
Yes, and another thing that you said that resonates with me is not. not hearing from the usual subjects. Look, good for the young people that have resources
That's right.
in order to get a leg up, but it's some of the non-participatory members of that community when it comes to democracy, civic engagement, isn't because of a lack of interest. It's just because, as you've said, that there are barriers
Mhm.
for them to get from here to there.
Yes.
Now, part of your professional background is with the New York City Department of Education. Tell us about that experience. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And who and what inspired you to to do the work that you lead?
So, it's a long, complicated story. I was actually born here in the Bronx. I currently live in the Bronx. My parents are West Indian. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, in Dhahran, and then came back after ninth grade. You have to come back to the States for school. So, I went to high school and college in Minnesota, and then came back to start my teaching career in New York City, in East Harlem. And that experience, it was when I was in college and having had an off-campus study experience with school reform in the Chicago public schools, that I said, this is something that deeply resonates for me. I know the difference that teachers made in my life, and not just around the actual academic subjects, but who they were and how they inspired me, who they inspired me to be, was part of how I came into education. So I spent 19 years at the New York City Department of Education, starting as a classroom teacher. I was a middle school teacher, and then eventually became an administrator, and then worked in central office as the executive director of teacher development. And so I'd say that there are sort of two aspects of my career. So I started with young people in the classroom. I then moved out of the classroom to work with teachers. But that work with teachers was around, how do we show up for young people? How do we get content across to them that they need to be productive in their lives? But more importantly, how do we model for them who they should be out in the world? And now I've circled back to working directly with young people again. And so I'm very excited about this work. And I think, the work that I've done in education, the formal education structure, has really helped support. Much of our work is around out of school time, but it helps to inform how we think of what young people need. I think where teachers go wrong is oftentimes they're thinking of students just as vessels for content knowledge, as opposed to the whole the whole human being. And so I often say that, you know, young people and kids, they're going to remember some of the content that we teach them, a lot of it, but more importantly, who do we show up as, and how do we model how we're supposed to engage with other people and in our communities?
It's an important point because I think a lot of times the formal education is more than just about learning about subjects,
So,
but as you mentioned, it's also learning and finding out who I am as a person
mhm,
and how do I engage with others. And I think one of the reasons why I asked the question about your upbringing to all of our guests is because too often when a person like you is approached, it's very specific to the work that you're doing with your organization. And there's, of course, nothing wrong with that. We spent the
right.
first part of this conversation unwrapping that, but it's equally important to learn the background. I mean,
Hmm.
what a wealth of knowledge that you have in having studied abroad, in
Hmm.
the work that you've done, even within the United States,
Yeah,
working in different markets, and of course the background of your parents. One of the and I think there's we don't do enough of that, meaning that
absolutely.
our country's so insular.
Hmm.
For example, when it comes to language, we're so very monolingual,
Hmm.
where if you go anywhere outside the United States,
Hmm.
people are speaking two, three languages. And of course, we live in a global society.
Yep.
Knowing more than one language is not a nice to have; it's a need to have to remain competitive both personally as in country. Anyway, my question to you is in the experience that you've had, both professionally and personally, when it comes to education, is there any, because I think good ideas are across the street, across the state, across the
Mhm.
country, across the globe. Is there anything from that experience that you've integrated into in the work that you do now, as the work that you've done as an educator? Anything that you could share?
So, oh my gosh, this is such a good question. I mean, I think everything. I think who I show up as hopefully in the world is, what I had to learn as a teacher. I had very traditional ideas about teaching when I started in the classroom. And what I had to learn was to listen, right? To listen to young people, to listen to what they were concerned about, what was important to them, et cetera, so that I could embed that into the things that we were teaching, et cetera, that I was teaching on a daily basis. So I think as a teacher, I or from my formal teaching experience, I learned that. I learned that you need to identify that the skills that kids already have and use that as a launch point. So oftentimes people talk about asset based. Nobody comes to us as an empty vessel. They know things, they have had experiences, and you need to use those experiences to build to the next level. And so I think a lot of what I try to do in my day-to-day work is figure out where people are and then try to either come to consensus or help to build in those perspectives into what I'm doing. Just, and your work, just honoring diverse experiences and bringing them to the fore. I think that's a lot of what I've learned to do and that I try to do. It's really important to us, to me in particular, and then also to citizens and scholars, that we elevate the voices of young people because they have a lot to say if we listen.
That's wonderful advice, both from an education standpoint, but also from a professional standpoint. The listening part, but also meeting them where they are. As an educator myself, I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia College here in Chicago. One of the things that I strive to do, which I learned the hard way, right, as a student, but also working in corporate America, you can't have an overarching way to measure success and to teach because while that is good and I think it's a base, you have to really lean in to the individuals because everybody's different, everybody learns differently, and also in how you define success
That's right.
individually as opposed to
For
this
the whole group.
overarching. And I think the same thing applies for corporate America. I think too often people, whether it's the way you see the world or the way you absorb information, you're projecting success based on your experience and not necessarily taking the care of understanding, well, wait a minute, let me listen,
Yep.
first of all, to see what experiences they have, how they absorb information, so that as a leader, whether I'm a teacher or a newsroom manager or a manager in general, I can pivot in
Hmm.
order to nurture an environment of individual success that then becomes collaborative success. So I think that's excellent advice that certainly resonates with me. In the short time we spent together, we've covered many different topics. Is there anything we've missed that you would like to mention? Do you have any parting words or words of advice for the journalism community from the perspective of the work that you're doing?
So I think, so I want to say two things. I think, I want to impress upon us that what we are trying to do at CNS is give young people the skills to engage in difficult discussions. We want them to also be collaborative problem solvers, and some of them are already doing that work. We need to give more of them the opportunity to do that work, but also some of the work that we are also trying to do is making sure that they understand information, that they can identify misinformation and use the best quality information in the work that they do. So that's I want to make sure that I impress that point. I think in terms of journalism, what I would love to suggest is exactly the kind of work that you all are doing, right? There's so many challenging situations in the world, and we spend a lot of time talking about the challenges. We don't spend as much time talking about the people, sort of ordinary, everyday people who have great ideas that are trying to do something with those ideas. We don't spend enough time lifting those ideas up, identifying who those people are, so that they know that there are other people with whom they can network, they can collaborate, and are working and striving for us to sort of to be better and do better in this country and across the world. So I'd say finding those really good stories about, and I'm going to talk about young people in particular, finding those stories and really elevating them and amplifying them.
One of the things that you've mentioned, media literacy is so important as part of the education for young people to differentiate fake news
That's
versus
right.
legitimate news. And we know that where they're gravitating to for their news and information isn't legacy media, right?
Mhm.
It isn't newspapers,
That's
radio, or
right.
television. They're going straight to social media,
That's
and
right.
there's so much misinformation there
Absolutely.
that for them to attain those skills is so important. Another thing that resonated with me is creating a space for young people, a safe space for young people to engage in conflict resolution, right?
Hmm.
To talk about the things, whether it's in their where they study or in
Hmm.
their community, and get some coaching and mentoring and skills and a platform to resolve conflict in a way that's constructive and also respectful. So I think that that's also very important to do. Audra Watson, Chief of Youth Civic Programs, leading citizens and scholars, youth-facing initiatives. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciated this conversation and I appreciate that we are very like-minded in what we want for young people.
Thank you, and more to come for sure.
Thank you.
And thank you all for spending this time with us as well. Conversation and collaboration nurture a well-informed citizenry. Amugabalta, until next time.